What's up, everybody, and welcome back. I am Bumbling.
I'm Tumbling.
And I'm Crumbling.
And we're the Bumbling, Tumbling, Crumbling Idiots podcast. Alright, let's get into the news. Today's topic, Dicebreakers. So basically, since this is the repilot of the Bumbling, Tumbling, Crumbling Idiots podcast, let's start us anew. So, Dicebreakers. Play on words of icebreakers. Why am I explaining this? I don't know. But let's talk about D&D.
Oh.
All right. If we're talking about D&D, I think we need to bring up we have a few important questions that we want to bring up, and I think that because all three of us have DM'd before, I think we've got a really unique perspective for this kind of topic. If y'all are okay with me asking something real quick.
Of course.
What is your take on would you rather have a group that is exclusively new players, people who are passionate about D&D, who want to learn the game, or another group of players who are also very passionate, but they've been playing for years and all of them will min-max? They will all know exactly how to play the game and most eloquently exploit it to their advantage. Which would you prefer to have as a DM?
Well, both are terrifying, but I feel like I'd have more fun playing around and exploring new ideas with the new players, because I mean,
absolutely.
I can be more creative with a new player rather than a person who knows the rules.
Yeah, and if and like, not to say that like min-maxing is like not cool, because like min-maxing is like, if you want to play like a really strong campaign, then it can actually be really fun to like take that like angle. But as a DM, I would rather be able to see like a group of new players grow and improve their like both their mechanical skill and their role-playing skill, and see how that progresses. And also just like people who are really passionate, who are new to something, give a lot better energy to me than veterans who are still very passionate but in a different way.
Yeah, like that's a big thing, right? I think that what I have learned is that if you get having one or two experienced players at your table is great. Having a lot of experienced players isn't even bad, but if I'm playing with exclusively experienced players who know a lot about the game, you can get some good interactions. But if they're all really focused on like doing the most efficient thing, or like it sometimes feels less like a game full of whimsy and more like I'm watching a film.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I feel like newer players tend to give really, really out of the box solutions. And that's not to say that experts aren't creative. I'm sure that people that are very much into the game, they do give me some creative answers. But newer players, when I say creative, I mean are crazy. They have no concept of is that going to be an acrobatics check? They just want to ask if they can. They want Assassin's Creed. They want to leap off the building into a thing of Abel, and I'll be like, you can attempt to do that. I can't say it will work the way you want it to, but you can try. And they'll just do it. They won't be off-put by the DM just saying, you can try, or, yeah, you could definitely give that a shot. They won't be put off by that. But, like, an experienced player, I've noticed that if I ever say, like, you could definitely try that, they take it as, oh, this isn't going to work, but he doesn't want to say that. And that generally turns them off to the idea.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're like a DM who uses that specifically to just be like, it might not work, how about like you can also use it of like, it could work, but you just didn't think of that being an outcome, so it's like a fun pivot.
Yeah. And it also oftentimes seems that new players are way more likely to just commit to something really dumb, and sometimes it makes for a much more compelling solution to a puzzle or a problem that you've set out. Whereas a more experienced player might not necessarily solve the puzzle or the problem the like normal, efficient way, but it's still reasonably within the box, like clean cut. So new players are a lot more fun to like present problems to and be like, how do you want to fix this?
Like, an experienced player will look at, like, the effects of a spell they don't know about and just know what spell it is. Sure, their character might not know what it is, but now they can, even if they're trying their best to separate character knowledge and player knowledge, it's near impossible to have a perfect separation of the two.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it just means that they end up trying to stumble about to come to the same conclusion they did outside of game. And not only can that be a little frustrating for them to do, but it can be a little frustrating as a DM, because I can tell they're meandering towards a certain result. They're just trying to knock spells off the list till they figure out what it is. And I want to reward that kind of knowledge, but it usually ends up just out of either messing with puzzles, because they've just got those spells memorized and their effects, or messing with cool plot elements, because a barbarian who has nothing to do with magic will just happen to have played a spellcaster before and recognize something like minor illusion, or perhaps will notice something like, oh hey, there's a rune here. This might be a spell. I believe there is a spell, I think it's 4th level, that lets you place a rune, or I think an arcane sigil on something, and if you touch it, it'll explode. Is it 4th rune?
It is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, because you're not even like safe when you're trying to use homebrew as well, as I learned. Like a good player, an experienced player who is also a DM, who's like looked into homebrew even just a little bit, will know some things. Like, for example, I try to use some monsters from some YouTube channel that I found that covered like old forgotten D&D monsters, and Alex knew what they were, and I was like, oh wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, and just because I had by chance encountered the same channel, which to be fair, I do really enjoy that they are like updating the like stat blocks, because the monsters are very compelling.
Yeah, that is great. Also, another thing is, when I was creating I was creating the stat blocks for a monster for my Fallout campaign that I'm creating, the system. I was like, let me see if there's any death claws that are like D&D 5e, and I found them. I found them, and I'm like, oh my god, this is great. I'm just stealing. I mean borrow. I mean borrow.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, a lot of, I mean, not even just DMing, but D&D in general, is just taking ideas from other places and applying them to your own stuff. Not necessarily like, you know, like stealing an idea and being like, this is my idea, but like being like, I got a lot of inspiration or directly like plucked this from something because it seemed really interesting and fun to me. Like as a DM, you'll get a lot of inspiration from like the media that you consume, or like experiences that you've had before. As a player, players, they'll make characters that they want to play, and a lot of the time that'll end up being characters that are similar to some of their favorite TV show characters or book characters, or what have you. Which also kind of leads into an argument for like veteran players, of like new players will a lot of times have like really good ideas for like things they want to do, but not necessarily really good ideas for characters that they want to play, right? A veteran player might be like, well, I've been playing these kind of generic characters for a while now, and then they make a character that is like super out of left field, not necessarily like a joke character, but a character that has something compelling that is out of the normal, outside of the box.
Maybe a more gimmicky character, like
so like the trend I tend to see is newer players will have out of the box problem solving, but veteran players will have out of the box characters.
right? Like my
which makes it really interesting.
Yeah, and exactly like the same, like the going off the point of borrowing things, right? Nimona, a great movie on Netflix. I took the core character concept of Nimona. I created one of my favorite D&D characters out of it.
Yeah.
Is that character? Ooh, it's not the character that I happen to have the DM for, is it?
Oh, you've
It's not
DM'd
the shapeshifter.
Yeah, the shapeshifter who.
Oh,
Yeah. And D&D characters can come from like such simple ideas and become a lot more. Like I think my favorite character that I've ever played was a character I made, Paris Shiva, who was half orc ranger, and the idea for him just came from the one question of what if someone was objectively the most attractive being to exist, like a mortal was the most attractive thing to exist. And I had come up with that question after looking through like different mechanics and seeing just like different ways that characters could have interacted with Fae, whether it be a background or the ranger subclass. And I saw certain effects from that. I'm like, what if a character were to be the most attractive person that you could ever meet in your life and no one would ever compare? And I applied that to it, and it became a little bit more, because then it was applied to, well, this character is super attractive and everyone would see them as that, but they're not necessarily like going for everyone. They're in this kind of like situationship, a will they won't they, with like one person, and it's not and they're kind of exclusive in a way, and so it becomes a thing of like everyone wants this person but they don't want anyone else.
I think that's a really good synopsis of Paris's character, who I did enjoy having to get to see play him, but I would also like to mention that, speaking of the Fae, your interactions with another player at the table, another Fae, were, I don't want to call it misogynistic. Paris is not misogynistic. He's never seen a fairy before.
Yeah, well, I guess indeed
called her exotic. Paris called her exotic, and that was an interesting conversation.
I don't remember saying exotic. I remember calling her fairy a lot.
I believe during one conversation, I think maybe not exotic. Was it unique? All I know is that during a conversation, you did make a comment that had
it was
very much up in arms.
He did make a very kind of misogynistic. It wasn't necessarily misogynistic. It was more so just demeaning in general. Yeah. But I forget exactly what it was. I think it was like little something. But I do remember that it was a really fun character interaction, because this guy who had interacted with the Fae before, and is why he has such ethereal beauty, actively is racist towards the Fae, for some reasons unknown, and it's an interesting dichotomy of like, why would the Fae give him these gifts if he's actively hostile towards them? And it's a really fun character interaction to have another fairy that's like separate from all of the ones that he's known come in, and him just be like, you're a fairy. That's strange.
I feel like I'm listening to a character breakdown on like YouTube. Like I clicked on a random YouTube video and it's just like, here's a character breakdown from one of your favorite TV shows.
Wyatt, you are listening to a character breakdown,
I am.
and this is going on YouTube.
Dang.
So technically, in the wise words of Brennan Lee Mulligan, technically correct is the best kind of correct. So savor it while you can, Wyatt Merlot. Okay.
Which brings up a great exception to the ideas that we set out earlier of like new versus veteran players. And in general, I mean, it's not a rule. It's definitely not a hard and fast rule. But there is a lot of times where new players and experienced players are like they're not how you'd expect them to be, right? So take Dropouts Dimension 20, the first ever season they ever did for Dimension 20 was Fantasy High, and most of the players in that season had either DM'd or have been playing for a while. Brennan's a very experienced DM. Murph had DM'd before. Most of them had played before quite a bit, except for Allie. And Allie, they had never played before or DM'd or really seen a whole lot, so they were super inexperienced. But they still had a very compelling character and a very compelling play style, and they were able to roll with the punches really, really well. And meanwhile, the veteran players were coming up with the most crazy ideas that I've ever heard, like these just like absolutely insane ways to like get through any obstacle that was thrown at them that would throw off Brennan, even, who has experienced playing with like he DMs at like a camp for like teens and like younger kids, and still these players are still throwing things at him that fully just throw him off his feet that he wasn't expecting, because that's the beauty of D&D. As a DM, you can never prepare for everything, and your players are going to take advantage of that no matter what at every turn.
Yeah, and I think that should segue to our next point of different DMing styles, right? Because honest to God, Across the Nine Realms has been the first 5e D&D DMing experience for me, and I went in head first without knowing a dang thing. I was after a few sessions, I was like, "Hey, Cooper, I really enjoy Cooper's way of DMing. I like how he expresses himself and really goes into detail." So I tried to do that. It just didn't suck me in as much. It was just like I felt confused sometimes as well.
Yeah.
When I tried that.
A big thing when it comes to DMing in a descriptivist way is that, one, I absolutely stole that style. It is not my own. Every DM, all of it is derivative. You are going to learn your DMing style by experimenting and learning from other DMs and also trying out things for yourself. Never wanting to imitate another DM you like is never a bad thing. But there's a difference between playing in another DM style and having to emulate it. And sometimes you won't find yourself as comfortable trying to emulate it as you are just playing through it. My style is incredibly reliant on my capability to improvise strange words or obscure vernacular on the spot. Just thinking of a word that can describe the situation, going through my backlog in about half a second, so that there's never really a moment where I'm searching for words. Because if you're trying to do descriptivism, and you have to search for the word to describe what you're doing, it looks worse, it feels worse, and it can often be that way if I ever slip up in the middle of a session. It also gives a much more inherent value of thinking that, oh, this was planned out. But almost every single session that I have ever DM'd for the history of existence ends up being mostly improvisation, because it goes off the rails so fast. It has gotten to a point where I figure out the setting, I figure out some characters, and the plot is almost entirely dependent on the players just saying, "Hey, we want to go here," and they go there, and they do that. Because trying to plan out plots in advance tends to either suffer from railroading, or people's scheduling gets changed, they're not able to make it there anymore, or you sometimes lose players for one reason or another, and now any sort of plot hooks you'd set up with them are going to be abruptly left behind, and that can be unsatisfying for a narrative. It's difficult to make up for that.
Right there.
Yeah. And that shouldn't necessarily dissuade any new DMs either, because especially if you're coming into it like either with not a lot of knowledge of D&D or not a lot of knowledge pertaining to improvisation or acting or any of that, which, you know, you can have a D&D game without any of that. You can have a D&D game with very little of that, and it would still be fun if that's what your players want. But coming into it fairly new for DM especially, it's not necessarily a bad thing to be to take a step aside and be like, I need to take a second to think about what needs to happen next. If you're ever thrown off a little by what your players do or want to do, and it's perfectly okay to be like, hold on, I need to think for a second, I need to replan, or I need to plan something new for just a moment. Especially as a new DM, it's very good to be able to just take a step back for a second and be like, whoa, that was crazy, let me think about what happens next.
Yeah, and that is a great point. And going back to what Cooper said about how he improvises everything, the past how many sessions, I don't know. I know the setting. I have no map prepared for the world. I just know the setting, which is where you guys were in the realm of the gods. What gods were there? Umir. I had a character sheet for him. Actually, no, I didn't. I only grabbed a character sheet for him at the last second.
Yeah.
And
I plan my sessions a little bit more than you guys do, I think. But it's less so of planning and more so I have like plot points that I want to hit, but when and where I hit them isn't necessarily like set in stone. Like, it's very flexible plot points where it's like, I want to hit this at some point, but I'll let my players go around and do what they need to do what they want to do, and whenever the time feels right, I'll hit the plot point, I'll bring it in.
As an example of that, one moment. Actually, you guys continue.
Okay, so anyway, right. And this next session, this upcoming session, is the most that I've been planning for quite some time. And I'm not planning like big plot details. I'm planning the environment to flush it out. I'm going to because like this is basically like a brand new beginning. Right, it's 3 years after what last happened. One of the characters is still around looking and still has the mission of trying to save the Nine Realms, even though that's been on the back burner.
With only a couple of characters surviving and only one still actively searching, it's gonna be kind of like a soft reset almost.
Yeah, this is basically like the Scooby-Doo movie, okay? The live-action Scooby-Doo movie. Like, the whole party breaks apart for one reason or the other, most of them being dead, and then we skip to like 3 years later. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the characters who are still there have changed and become different people, and it's going to be interesting to see how the characters coming in are going to affect the story and, you know, the characters that are surviving. But for sure, there's always sessions that will be a little more planned or a little less planned. Inevitably, you're going to have to improvise because players will always do something you don't expect, and you're going to need to bring something new in that you weren't planning on bringing in. And
that's okay.
Yeah. And confidence is a big factor in it, like, because
yes, absolutely.
Whenever I'm DMing, I kind of push my self-doubt to the side, and after the game is over, after the session is over, I start to think, and this happens almost every session, was that a good session? Did people enjoy it? They may have said that they enjoyed it, but was that the truth, right?
Yeah. DMing, and because DMing is in a way performing. It's, you're in front of these people who are looking to you to be the person who is telling them what is happening, what are they saying, what are they able to do, and so you're performing, you're being these characters, or you're setting out this plot point or this or that, and as in most performances, confidence is one of the biggest things in it, because if you mess up, that's okay, but if you confidently keep going even when you stumble, then people might not even notice that you made a mistake,
Yeah.
And if they do notice it, it's, that's fine too. It's not the end of the world. You can be like, I messed up a little bit, but then you can use that as a learning experience to go and create better things in the future and become a better DM in the future. And I'd like to go back to the conversation earlier about DMing styles and not necessarily emulating a DMing style, but like taking inspiration from it. For example, my DMing style takes a lot of inspiration, especially because it's the first like big D&D thing I got into. My DMing style takes a lot of inspiration from Dimension 20 and Brennan Lee Mulligan. Not necessarily in the way he describes things, but in the fact that he makes often very compelling or strange characters that you wouldn't expect to act or behave the way they do. And I very much already enjoyed just making characters that might not be normal or are at the very least interesting in some way or another. And so whenever I am setting up for a session, I'm always thinking, what new characters can I introduce that'll be fun? What can I do with the characters I've already introduced that would make a compelling plot point? And almost all of my story comes not from the environment, but from the characters and how they're affecting it.
When we were playing in your campaign, Alex, I have to say, that really did show, even though it was one of your first big times DMing, you honestly had such a head start because of your understanding of the source material, like, off rip. You really did know a lot about what you were doing. Even if there was stuff that you didn't have memorized. A big thing in D&D, this is something that everyone needs to know, and I know that I'm going to say this, we've referenced Brennan Lee Mulligan 3 times during this podcast.
Yes.
If all of our collective knowledge of D&D is only summed up by that man, I do not know if that's a compliment to him or an insult to ourselves. Either way, being a DM is not memorization of knowledge. It will never be memorization of knowledge. Just if you have a lot of things, you know off the top of the head, that can be helpful, it will not be your front and center skill when you're DMing. What matters is your application of knowledge. It's like being a coder. You can't be expected to memorize the syntax for every single line of script or code you use, but you can try to learn how you're meant to apply those scripts so that they function properly, so that you're going to make something that works in the end. And that's kind of how it works with D&D. If you're trying to figure out your DM style, figure out a way that you can comfortably express your story and get it across the ideas you want to get across without feeling like you're railroading your players or forcing them into an outcome that they aren't actively trying to go for.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. And, we've talked a lot about DMing, but what do we prefer? Okay, so if I were to ask you a question, which would you prefer, DMing or being a player? Which would you pick?
I have my answer because I've thought about it before. Playing is extremely fulfilling. Playing, especially under a good DM, but even in general, playing D&D or any other TTRPG is extremely fun. You get to create this character who you get to then just like become. You get to embody this character, and you get to, you know, have this group of friends or just like acquaintances, and you get to just in character just interact with all of these people and the world that's set out in front of you, and you get all of these tools and you can solve all these puzzles in these fun ways, and it's very fun to just be a player because you're along for a ride and you're helping create the story, but you're also just kind of writing on the story itself because it's being set out by the DM, and you don't have as much stress of, you know, where is this going to go. So it's a little more stress-free to play, and it's very fun. However, DMing, for me at least, is so fun. Being able to just create a world and just see it in my own mind, and then having to come up with ways to describe it to other people to get them to see the same thing I'm seeing, or at least something similar, and creating this, you know, this whole thing, and hearing what my players are coming up with throughout the sessions, and picking up on certain of those ideas and being like, oh, this would be a good idea, or this would make a really good location or a person, and implementing those into the campaign is really fun. And like I said earlier, characters are some of my favorite things in D&D, whether it be as a player or as a DM, and being able to make a bunch of compelling NPCs and, you know, companions, or like monsters or evil persons, it is incredibly fun and fulfilling to create all of these people who all have their own lives and their own stories and their own interactions with the world and with the players, and being able to create these like fictional people who still have such a real life and become something that my players see as important to them, to the point where, you know, you get actually emotionally invested into, you know, a character or an idea or a place in this fictional world, and being able to see that I can create these connections with my players with things that I've just thought up in my mind and written down, or even sometimes not written down. Sometimes it's improvised, and those are the best characters for the players to pick up on. It's some of, I think, one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done is DMing a campaign and just seeing my players connect to what I've created in such a meaningful way.
I would like to add on to that. Your question, Wyatt, was that do we prefer being a player or a DM, right? Was that the question?
Yeah, that was the question.
Yes. Sorry for talking.
You're right. I have to say this. I think that preferring playing as a player or DM, if you do both, has to go by a different metric. Because if you're asking for enjoyment, I love being a player, getting to experience and interact with the story through someone else. It's so fun being able to be a passenger in the ride that is the trip down on the story road. But as Alex had put it, but when I'm the DM, I am the vessel through which the story is told. I am the book, and my players are the readers. Except they get to pick where to go. A choose-your-own-adventure book, if you will. Oh wait, those already exist. But anyway, I feel more satisfied when I'm the DM because I get to see how my players react and interact with the story that I came up with. Much like Alex, I enjoy the emotional interactions that they get to have with these characters, but more than just getting to see how they react to them, I like being able to interact with people from perspectives that I could never hold in real life. If I was a shopkeeper, a strange little goofy little goblin hiding behind my wares and attempting to sell you something that I knew was not functioning, it would be up to my players to identify whether or not I was trustworthy or if my wares were worthwhile. And getting to see the little cogs in their mind turn and twist as they identify and look through clues or ideas that goblin has dropped through that conversation, it's almost like watching someone solve a mystery in real time. Or if you're in the middle of a combat encounter and your players are desperately trying to figure out what to do, or what's the enemy's weak point, or how do you resolve this. It's fun. It's satisfying. But I don't think anything will ever match the fun I had when I was playing in your campaign, Alex, and we managed to rule of cool a spell interaction. If you're fine with me talking about that.
Absolutely.
So, in Alex's campaign, his wonderful, wonderful campaign, we were being pursued by a group. We'll say a nondescript group. It was a very large group, and they were chasing us down in a very, very densely packed forest. Myself and my party members had cast Leomon's Tiny Hut, one of our bards had, and we were attempting to gain reprieve while we planned what to do next. We knew we might be able to squeeze in a short rest to regain spell slots, or a long rest if we really pushed that Leoman's Tiny Hut, but it would still be risky, and we might end up on the other side having wasted the duration if we weren't somewhere safe before doing so. So we decided that we needed to put distance between ourselves and our pursuers. And the best way I could think of doing that was using a combination of spells called Alter Self and Mirror Image. Normally, how Mirror Image works is that you make 3 identical copies of yourself as you are when you cast it. But Alter Self allows you to change yourself into looking as though you are another person, or rather, make yourself look however you like. Alter Self is effectively a worse polymorph, or kind of like Disguise Self, but better, because you can physically change your characteristics. I asked Alex, our wonderful, very lenient DM, historically lenient DM, if I could alter self in between making my mirror images to have a mirror image copy of all 3 of my other party members. He allowed it if I rolled well enough, and I did. And so I got to strut out of the tiny hut as though I were 4 people instead of 1, having to roll performance and deception checks constantly to keep up the ruse. And it worked! I rolled 18s, 19s, 17s, and 20s, and up until the very last moment, I was undiscovered. I gripped a sending stone in my hand, let the rest of my party know that it was okay to exit the hut, and we skedaddled. And what followed was one of the most terrifying chase sequences I've ever experienced in any D&D game whatsoever, and none of it would have been possible without our wonderful DM, Alex. Let's give a good hand to him. I'd clap for you if we weren't on a call. Here, I'll give you tongue clicks instead.
Well, yeah, it's great too, because that moment specifically, I loved that happening. You come up with such I don't know how to describe this other than you keep punching me in the gut. Like you keep creating like solutions that I could have never even thought of, and it's always really fun to see those play out. But that whole chase sequence as a whole was very fun to narrate to DM, but it's also one of the portions of the campaign that, to an extent, I kind of wish I had played it out differently, because you guys had, you started getting chased, and you keep coming up with all of these incredible just like solutions to these problems and these really cool character moments, and you just keep getting chased down, and eventually they do catch you and bring you to where they wanted you to be. And the way in which they ended up catching you, while it wasn't entirely like a because I said so moment, because I was debating on whether or not one of the people had an item and which would help them, and so I just rolled a dice, just a basic luck check for myself to see whether or not they had it, and they did, so they ended up using it, which is how they caught you. But the way in which you were captured almost makes me wish I had allowed the player freedom to be able to kind of like escape from that situation, because you had done so many like cool solutions and like effective maneuvers that I ended up while I allowed it, it didn't end up in your favor. But it did create a lot of very fun moments. But I do use that as a learning opportunity to do better in the future. Of like, be less like be able to, you know, release your grasp on the story and your players for a minute if you have to, because at that point I hadn't fully, being one of, you know, my first times actually DMing a game, I hadn't fully learned when or how I could release my grip to an extent. So I use that going forward, being like, okay, so I need to be more thoughtful of those moments.
Yeah, them capturing us led pretty directly into a major plot point, and it didn't feel as paced well as I would have liked it. Especially with all the creative, our bard casting Leoman's tiny hut to buy us time, using mold earth to quickly gain a vantage point by trying to stack up cubes of dirt to try and avoid interaction with them to stave them off, using mirror image and alter self. A lot of thought went into creative solutions to try to escape from them. We even considered trying to interact with a messenger NPC you had given us, who has been lovingly adored by the party. His name is Clint. To try and have him to swim us across the sea for us, but to no avail. I still don't judge you for having chosen to have us get captured anyway, because we did get to express a lot of our player freedom, but we were also going against what was effectively, I think, at least 30 humanoids, each individually very skilled and experienced, and an entire forest being controlled by what could I can only assume to be some form of druid.
Or ranger. You know, one of the characters, you know, one of the NPCs there, having been the like major, not necessarily the boss, but like the major mini boss of that section of the campaign, commanding this like army of people who, like you said, are also very skilled individuals.
And we were what, level 5, 6?
At that point, you might have been level 6 or 7, because I remember after that encounter you leveled up a couple of times.
Yes, and it wasn't for nothing. If we hadn't done all of the player expression we had, we probably would not have leveled up in that encounter. We would have been caught, and that would have been the end of it. You gave us milestone achievements to make up for the fact that while we may not have achieved our goal of escaping, we still got something out of our clever ideas. We learned something.
Yeah.
And I think that's a decent compromise. It's not what I'd like. I really would have liked to see how maybe we had to live as fugitives after trying to escape from these folks. Maybe we cashed in our last favors with the adventurers group that we had been working with to try and avoid them, and that didn't even work either. So maybe we can't even call them for help anymore because, well, they're trying to not get killed by the group that's hunting us. There were a lot of interesting character interactions that could have happened, but ended up getting shelved. But I still think that what you did was reasonable. I still think it was very much like a decision you made that worked out in the end for the story.
Yes.
Can we talk about how we beat the final boss?
Oh yeah, and this is another thing that happens in D&D. You can spend a while. You can spend like sessions upon sessions upon sessions, building up like a character or a boss, and building them up as this like powerful thing, and creating their character pretty powerfully, and then your players will maneuver their way around it.
Yeah, just
for like. Yeah, like my final, like my the big bad, the BBEG of my campaign. He had been set up as like this thing. He had taken over one of my players, Cooper's character, for a little while until the rest of the party eventually managed to get him back, and this guy had been set up as like he's got armies waging wars in like certain different countries, trying to take them over and like bring down their power a little bit so that he could focus on what his goals were. And he had all of these things set up around him, and he had all of these like abilities, and my players, they come up with this plan which involved them dropping the ceiling on top of him and then immediately hitting him with every single status effect you can hit a creature with in the game. And he couldn't do anything because he had every single status effect you could have just applied to him because he failed his throws.
He was knocked prone, then frozen, which, by the way, as a fun fact, that was from what was it? It's the opposite of Agnazar's Scorcher. I think it was Icing Death's Frost. Yes.
Yeah.
Being frozen is not an official status condition that replaces others. So his movement speed was reduced to 0 feet, and he was knocked prone, in which he would have to use his movement speed to get back up. We wrote that as he could not get back up until he was unfrozen, which ended in what is it, a minute duration on it? So
something like that. Yeah.
Yes, because so he was just locked in place for 10 rounds of combat and could do nothing.
Yeah.
Which I am glad
he just got wailed on, and sometimes that happens, and that's all right.
I'm glad that Alex chose to have like 3 different phases of that fight because it ended.
Because I had planned originally to have different phases of the fight. I just didn't expect the first phase to go like that.
And also, a lot of folks may be confused on how we drop the ceiling on them. I did mention Mold Earth. Now, if you've read Mold Earth's spell, you'll note that the movement of the Earth itself can't cause damage. So if you cast it and fling it at someone, it doesn't directly hurt them. But that's the initial movement you do with the spell. If you, per se, move the ground out from under them and they fall to their death, that still counts. If you use Mold Earth to, say, dislodge a granite ceiling about 5 square feet cube and let that fall onto their skull, there may be a problem with that interaction.
Do some damage. Which is definitely if I DM any campaigns in like the 5e system in the future, it's gonna Cooper, your use of Mold Earth and your very unique uses of Mold Earth in that campaign are gonna make me rethink my rulings on the spell itself. Not necessarily like restricting it, but just like. But just think about like how I can handle Mold, because I didn't even think about handling Mold Earth until you just came in and had all of these things that you're doing with them. Like, I need to start planning for things like this.
I think Mold Earth, what needs to happen is when it says that the movement of the Earth can't hurt anybody, I know that in the spell itself it is specified. It is just this movement when you cast a spell. Just when you make a ruling, just say that as a rule, no matter what the Mold Earth is doing, unless you set up a trap in advance, like, again, digging a hole straight to however far down you want, and then having somebody fall down it. If it is the item you are moving that is hitting them, it physically can't hurt them. It really sucks, it's not as realistic, and it doesn't follow rules as written, but counterpoint, it's a game about magic and medieval weaponry.
Yes.
Realism, while appreciated, is not always the top priority.
Yes, which also comes to the point of whenever you make a ruling or whenever you allow a player to do something, be careful, because that is going to be the way that they are going to view that like ruling for the entire rest of the campaign. They like, if you allow a player to do something, they will be like, okay, so I can just do this whenever I want now. And they will use that. So you have to be careful with the way you word things, and also make sure to be mindful of how these interactions play out.
Yeah, it ends up being a little bit, how do I put it, crazy. Like, if you make any, and I mean literally any ruling, and that player remembers it, it will haunt you for the rest of the campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if you don't remember the ruling, they will. They will remember.
They will get receipts. Like, for example, if you say offhandedly to somebody, an artificer with whatever, you say, "Hey, you can use this infusion without a restriction on your capability of wielding multiple items." Let's say you've infused an item like a sword, and I say, "Yeah, you could infuse that with fireball," and you ask, "Hey, when does it trigger?" And I say, "Oh, when it hits another organic creature." Then you say, "Oh, how helpful," and begin tossing around other items with that infusion as though they are nuclear bombs. And sure, with infusions, if you're infusing a spell in certain artificer subclasses, you can do it as a form of concentration. You can end your concentration on the spell at any time. But if I recall correctly, for the most part, usually it takes an action to activate the spell that's on an item. That does not apply if your DM offhandedly mentions something, though. That player will try to use that against you for the rest of the campaign. But if you're in a situation like this, here's some things to remember. Your word is God as DM. Like, ultimately, what you say is how the story will go, but do not let yourself make these mistakes very commonly and then go back on them later, because then players will feel like there's no consistency. Players often don't care too much about realism. Realism matters, but consistency is the most important thing. If you tell them they can do something one session and then they suddenly can't the next, they will have a problem with that. So, if the time comes and you're like, "Oh, yeah, I made that ruling without thinking about it," just to be honest with your players. Be like, "Yeah, that's not how I intended the spell to be used. That's not how I intended this ruling to work. And while I will allow you to do it this time, please don't use it this way in the future." Because ultimately, while we all want player freedom, there are times where if someone says, for example, "Hey, can I use create or destroy water to get rid of the saliva that has like the poison in it?" And you say, "Sure." And they're like, "Cool. Can I use create or destroy water to destroy the water inside of somebody's body, instantly killing them?" And then you have a problem.
Yeah.
I swear, players are like lawyers sometimes.
Yeah. And that's sorry, continue.
No, I was about to get onto a side tangent about something else.
But this applies to like, this will depend on like DMing style and like the way you follow rules, but there's some interactions, especially with spells, where if it's like an interesting spell interaction that you would like to see like play out, it's never a bad idea to have your player roll like an Arcana check to see if they can use their magical knowledge to kind of shift the ability of the spell this like one time. Not necessarily as a like, you can just do this now, but as a, in this specific situation, the way you are stressed here, you can attempt to channel this magic in a slightly different way, which can make an interesting encounter, but also something that you have to be watchful of, because if you are not careful, then they will just keep trying to use spells in that way.
I have one final question before we probably need to wrap this up. So, would you rather, I'm going to pose this as a DM question, if you were the DM, and then as a player. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
First as the DM. Would you rather have to DM an evil player or a good player?
Okay, so this is going to be hard.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really difficult question. Because good, I'm gonna be honest, is pretty much the default standard. Most players end up picking good. Most new players do it. Most regular players end up with either chaotic good or neutral good or something in between, where they don't really want to commit to being an extreme side of the spectrum, but they also don't want to be expected to do bad things. And I really, really hate that, because as much as I like good-hearted characters and I love the nice stories they can create, sometimes I just want the nuance of a little bit of how bad can I possibly be. Please, please give me I don't want a party full of evil characters, but just one or two, please. Please.
Absolutely. Yeah, in a party of mostly good characters, having even one bad egg can create so much nuance in how the party interacts with each other and how the campaign goes, because all these like good characters are going for these goals, and then this evil character, they might not necessarily be like kicking puppies evil, but they might be selfish or looking out for only what they want, and it creates an interaction of like, we both are wanting to achieve the same action, but the reasons for which we want to achieve this action are vastly different, and it creates like a rift, which is interesting to watch play out.
Yeah, and I'm so glad, Cooper, that you allowed me to make evil.
Of course. Your introduction to this campaign, it was quite literally another player stumbles upon a prison cell in which you have made yourself comfortable. You have invaded while there is a trespasser into the country you were living in, just kind of chained to a chair. And you immediately bring out torture implements. And you just start torturing him. And as soon as you get the item you want from him, it is mad. It has a glyph on it to prevent it being stolen. And so when you have him try to open it with his mouth, because you've restrained everything else, he blows his jaw off and pops his neck back as though he were I can't even think about what's the word, a firecracker. And you just clap your hands together and go, "Oh, what a good show! Jesus Christ!"
That was the best introduction.
Yes. Honestly, it's one of my favorite, I think, moments in a campaign that I've ever seen, that I've been a part of, because it's so simple, and yet it perfectly defined your character right off the bat.
Oh my
immediately.
God. Exactly, it did. Now, and that's kind of why I love Ooth so much, is that I can be absolutely unhinged, but still, as a character, it has morals, even if very little. It's perfect.
Which is also an interesting interaction you can see if you have an evil player, where this character, they have scrupulous morals, but they're still morals. And you can still see how, like, where their limits are, despite their limits being a little bit farther past what the other characters might have.
Right, exactly. Because, like, Oot is not puppy-kicking evil. Murder type of evil, though, still.
Yeah.
So, then
But DMing at least one evil player is usually a good time.
no,
And
playing-
honestly, playing an evil character beat playing good or evil. I will say this: I have only ever exclusively gotten to play good characters, and as soon as I get to the semblance of playing an evil character, what ends up happening is the entire party ceases to trust anything I do. I try to make a nuanced character, and it almost always ends up being he's the guy in the party no one will ever listen to ever, for the sake of not listening to them. This has not happened in a group that I've gotten to play with you guys, because I've not gotten to play an evil character with you guys really yet. But I assure you, every time, every single time.
Yeah. I do very much enjoy playing good characters, not necessarily like just everywhere on the good spectrum, because there's a lot, it is a very wide spectrum of good and what that means to different people.
but there's also a wide spectrum of evil at the same time.
Exactly, and being able to play a character that like might be very loyal but also very self-centered, or a character who just simply has just a completely different code of ethics from other people, or even someone who just doesn't mesh as well with the idea of good. They're not necessarily bad, but they're not they're not good either. They're very like scrupulous. It's very fun to play someone who might not go with the grain of like what the party is their ideals are.
Yeah. And I think that wraps it up. We've been talking for an hour, a little over an hour. So, unless we got anything more to say.
Please, for the love of goodness gracious, great balls of fire, give DMing a shot. If you haven't already, do it. Even if it's minor, even if it's for like 1 to 3 people, even if it's all homebrew, even if it's all base 5e pre-made characters, even if it's a one-shot, I assure you, it is an experience you will not forget.
I just remembered something that I was going to add in before when we were talking about how planning doesn't always go your way. I was playing this homebrew campaign, and I'm just going to throw this in real quickly. This campaign, we deal a lot of damage. There are spells that can multiply someone's damage by 5, right? So we have a final boss, the God Killer himself. I retort with one of my snarky remarks, just a one-liner before we get into combat. We killed him in 1 round. He didn't even get a turn. He didn't get a single turn. And guess how much health he had? He had 32,000 health.
Wow.
Dang, that is...
Yeah, no, that'll happen. Yeah.
I held my action until somebody else did their turn. They did a lot, and then I just used the 5 times spell, and we just won. And that was that. Okay, we had held off the boss fight the last session, so because we thought it was going to take a while, it was going to be a large boss, and we were like, okay, so it'll take a while. We get there, we beat it in 5 minutes, and we're like, so what now? And the funny thing is, the person I play with on my YouTube channel, James, he was the DM, and he added more health to the boss thinking it was too easy, and it was still easy.
It's simply... the only way I can describe it, in the most important way that you'll hear anytime you play D&D, it is a skill issue. It is purely an issue of skill. Luck plays nothing into it. Exclusively a skill issue. If I get hit, it's because of luck. If I hit the opponent, it's because of skill. It does not matter what you roll. It matters how you roll and who's rolling, and it should always be me.
I mean, when I definitely hit a player with die, it's definitely luck. I have a whole lot more luck when DMing.
Which is a good closing. Is don't ever let the table become adversarial. Don't ever let it be players versus the DM, because at the end of the day, it's not about winning a game. The players aren't, gonna be trying to like destroy all the DM's plans on purpose or maliciously. The DM shouldn't be trying to not let their players play the game the way they want to, or that the DM should not be railroading these players into things that they don't want. And the table should never end up being players versus the DM. It should always be a collaborative experience to create the story together, because that is the beauty of just tabletop RPGs in general, but D&D especially, is just you create this story with nothing but a few rules and mechanics and your own imagination.
As a conclusion to this excellent experience, I just have to say, if you are on the fence about playing D&D, or if you're not sure if you're interested in DMing, if maybe you're a player but you've never DM'd before, let me tell you, look into any resources you can. I recommend watching plenty of other DMs do what they do, like, for example, as we said, Brandon Lee Mulligan, but there are thousands upon thousands of wonderful channels in which you can watch DMs do what they do. Focus less on how the players interact and watch more on how the DM reacts or sort of deals with the ideas proposed by players. When a player says something, watch how the DM sort of responds, because the one thing the players never really know is what the DM is thinking. Again, you're a book. They shouldn't be able to see what the next pages are. I really think that within every D&D player, there can be a good DM, and we need more DMs in this world.
I hope you guys enjoyed this, because we enjoyed making it, and I am Bumbling.
I'm Tumbling.
And I'm Crumbling.
And that makes us the Bumbling, Tumbling, Crumbling Idiots. And we're out.